All rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening. Welcome to the Planning Board meeting of May 25th, 2022. First on the agenda for a public hearing is the Maj and Ademi 552 Route 6. Mike?
Yeah, my only comments were, sorry, I'm reading off a phone. The trash enclosure is now on the plan, provide the easement. Joel said he's trying to get it, but I don't have a copy of that yet. And the outdoor brick pavers, if they're gonna eat out there, make sure you come and get a permit for the outdoor dining. We waived it last year, but I don't think it's waived anymore, so if you're gonna do it, just make sure you get a permit first, and then you'll explain that you're gonna move the chairs from inside out to keep the number at 39.
Thank you. Rich?
So we had a few comments that have been addressed by the applicant. The stormwater line, they did find the easement. It was in our building department file. We haven't gotten any information on the monitoring wells, but that could be a condition of any approvals we have moving forward. There is a grease trap already on premises. That was unclear earlier, but there is one that's been proven to us. The only other thing that would be needed are details for the signs to be provided. The map did show where they were going to be, just how high and the typical sizing of them. That's something that can be provided relatively straightforward. So otherwise, no comments.
Thank you, Rich. And Pat?
The applicant's addressed all my comments on this, and it's on for public hearing this evening, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mike, you mentioned a outdoor dining permit. There will be outdoor dining when they open. I assume we bought it at 39 seats. So there is no permit for outdoor dining as it exists today?
They need to get a permit. Last year and 2 years, whatever it's been for COVID, the town board waived it. But as far as I know, it's not waived this year, but I'll check on it for them. If it's not required, we're not going to make them get it. We just have to check into it.
Thank you. Any comments from the board? This has been in front of us for a couple meetings now.
No comments.
Would someone like to make a motion? Anyone from the public wish to be heard on this?
Mr. Chairman, being there's no public comment, I'd like to make a motion to close the public hearing.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And Pat, would you prepare a resolution, but conditional upon Rich's comments?
Yes, will do.
On the monitoring wells and the sign
Mr. Chairman,
details?
if you recall, at the last meeting, you had indicated that you would have a resolution prepared and that there were no comments.
No, I don't believe we should.
So we did ask folks to
Right.
clarify that, apparently that was not the case.
Yeah,
When I heard it,
okay,
you said it.
all right, so.
But you still don't have the easement, Joel.
Yeah,
Yeah, we have the easement for the drainage, and I spoke to Mr. Albano, and he's gonna get the other easement. That was.
Not for mine, for the driving on the adjacent property.
But again, I know that you folks would like to see this place open, and it's another 2 or 3 weeks now. That's not fair.
we'll follow up with Rose tomorrow. I'll speak to Rose.
So is there any way that you can
Authorize,
can you,
the board can authorize you to execute.
The resolution, so it doesn't have to come back to you if you choose to do that.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, we've reviewed it several times. We're very supportive of the project. We just want to make sure it's done rightly, so yes, we can do that.
so, Pat, why don't you just explain that again?
Say again?
Please explain that again so my clients can hear that.
So it doesn't have to return to the planning board.
Okay.
So the chairman has just been authorized to sign the resolution when it's prepared.
Okay, and that,
So
Do we have to
That can be
vote on
done.
that?
Yeah, you have to vote.
We have to vote. Okay. So, okay.
Yeah.
All right, so I'll make a motion that the board authorizes the chairman to sign the resolution on behalf of the board.
thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Joel, as I said, it's still conditional upon the sign details and the monitoring wells. that
All
Rich-
the conditions.
Excuse me, but I believe the height of the sign is on the map, is on the site plan. If you, I asked you, I also already asked you if you wanted a copy of the actual signs, and you didn't indicate that you needed that, you just want to know where they were and the height, which is on the drawing.
I'll review it with Rich, and all the details we have, I'll sign off on it.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. The second item on the agenda, dynamic properties, requested an adjournment, so we'll follow up with them in a couple of weeks. I'd like to move, we have an item listed underneath miscellaneous, number 7. Are they represented here tonight? D. Almeda, Hernane, 26, okay. I'd like to move you up on the agenda. Mike, comments? This is a regrading application?
The applicant proposes to regrade the property at 26 Glenview Drive, Carmel. The property is adjacent to Lake Oneida. The applicant wishes to regrade his property to add a pool and garage in the future. I gave a copy of the landfill law, which says that they cannot work on Sundays before 8 in the morning or after 5 at night, and the fill has to be clean and no everything has to be done in accordance with those 3 sections. Just for the board's clarification, the regrading is pretty much right to the property line. There are a few feet there, but it's pretty close to the property, so it is something that's from property line to property line, approximately half of the property after the house. And they're proposing 4-foot tall retaining walls, 5 feet apart. They have multiples, so they are allowed to do that. That does not require a variance unless they are less than 4 feet apart, then they would require it for the height of the walls.
Thank you, Mike. And Rich, I believe you had some comments also?
So as Mike mentioned, this is for a pool and a garage at the location, 26 Glenview. The overall disturbance for the project is about 41,392 square feet, but which is less than an acre. Applicant has provided a stormwater pollution prevention plan, which is currently under review. All it really has to be is for erosion sediment control. They are providing some additional work there. There's very few, it's a very detailed submittal. Not used to having some of those these days. The applicant intends to bring in about 1,800 cubic yards, and it's noted the soil will be certified clean to delivery. All manifests should be provided. That's all, to meet that criteria under the regrading section of the town code.
And Pat?
No real planning issues, Mr. Chairman. If it were not for the regrading permit, the pool and the improvements, the accessory structures are not subject to your approval. This isn't a site plan, it's a regrading plan, so in that context, we have no issues. The one issue that Mike raised, however, a lot of fill to the property line, there should be some context to adjacent properties and what's happening to the neighboring properties. Ordinarily, you want to have a nice relationship and not abrupt changes of grade.
Actually, one of my comments here in preparation for tonight was, does this create any issues for the neighbors? Can you describe the project a little bit before I ask the
Sure.
board to comment?
My name's Hernane D. Almeida. I'm the engineer of record for this project. I'm also the owner. The project, I'll get to the neighbor issue in a second. I'll just give a brief description of the project so you have a better understanding of it. As you can see right now from the papers that you should have in front of you, the plans, which are 11 by 17, the property slopes from the front to the rear property line. It's pretty consistent. If you notice here in the back portion,
Take it with you.
here in the back portion here, from about this tree that's going to be removed all the way to the rear property line, this terrain is it's more like an overland or woodland growth. There's a lot of bare spots. There's not a lot of grass growth. It's not prepared lawn. It's not manicured at all. It is manicured up until this tree right here. It's a small tree that has to be removed. That's the only tree. This one, and I might end up taking up this one, but this one's already dead. There are no leaves on it. It's just one giant trunk. In any case, so the regrading is to provide for this pool, the garage, obviously the driveway to feed the garage, and then down here I'm going to have it regraded to 3 flat areas. One for the wife and her garden and my tomatoes. The second 2 tiers are for water quality and water mitigation, stormwater mitigation. It's not required. Me as an engineer, I like to do a little bit more than I need to. I don't do to the minimums. So the application proposes to have all the water route to a water quality grass swale. So that will drop out all the sediment, take out all the nutrients, phosphorus, nitrogen, things like that. And then it'll go down here to a mitigation pond, infiltration basin, to be specific. As far as the neighbors go, on this side of the property, I'm staying pretty far off. I mean, it does go up to the property line, but that's where it feathers out to. That's on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, I'm a little bit more aggressive with my grading closer to the property line. That's because of the driveway there. I've spoken to my neighbor. He's in support of it. In fact, he says, if you want to come over to my property, I'm like, no, it's quite all right. I just want to keep this as a one applicant kind of thing. So he's okay. He's on board with it and everything else. In fact, we have such a good relationship that my compost pile is actually on his side of the property. And we kind of, there's a blurred line there. In fact, I mow half of, well, I'd say about 40 feet of his backyard here, because it's just easier for me to get to with my mower than it is for him to get with his. So we get along pretty well. And I've gotten no comment from my neighbors in opposition to this project.
Thank you.
In fact, my initial plan had the garage closer to this side, and to make the grading and the slopes, because the driveways have to meet a certain slope, I had to push it to the other side, give myself more run to have a smoother sloping driveway. Before, it was somewhere around the neighborhood of 18%. To get it down to the 15% or better, I had to give it more run.
The last two tiers that you referenced for your filtration, are they just slope tiers, or are you going to have retaining walls at each?
No, they're shallow basins. The first one is a grass swale. It's a New York State DEC green practice. It's a swale that has about a 1% pitch to it, so it's pretty flat. It gives time for sediment to drop out, and it also does the uptake for the nitrogen and phosphorus. When it gets to the lower basin, it's only about 12 inches deep, but it's 1,500 square feet, so it's rather large. And that fills up with water and infiltrates. I've done the perk test, and I've provided stormwater results, which, again, weren't necessarily required, but I did it anyway.
Also, I think we referenced about 1,800 cubic yards of fill coming in.
Yeah.
Certification could be required, but we've not had a lot of luck with fill coming in the town. Is there a requirement for a test once the fill comes? Because
I'm going to be eating the food that comes out of this soil.
I think you said
so-
this was your residence, right?
Yeah.
So,
So I plan on putting fruit trees and vegetable garden and things like that, of course, and my kids are going to be playing in this kind of stuff. So as you can see from the sections, the dark brown areas are the fill sections. I need that to make my levels there, one for the garden and the other one for the water quality management. And then, of course, I need to fill in the level where the pool's going to go in the middle tier there. I do have some cut and fill, but it does net out to about 1,800 cubic yards. And of course, I can't identify a site right now where I'm going to be getting it from, because if anybody knows anything about contractors, when you get soil and you find a site and you test it, it's got to be moved right away, or else they'll find somebody else that wants it. And for all I know, this process can take me 2-3 months. By that time, I'd lose that soil. So of course, I'll have it tested. I've done it here in the town before, where I've done jobs for fill, not on my own property, on others. And we find a site, we test it. That soil doesn't move until the building department and the engineering department review it and approve it, at which point we do the moving of the soil. There are tickets involved and everything else, and I provide at the end. But the soil is tested prior to moving and then monitored during the move.
No, I'm good.
Any questions from anybody else? That was very thorough, thank you. Do we have a motion for a public hearing, or schedule a public hearing?
Yeah, I'll make a motion to schedule a public hearing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. Nice to meet
Thank you.
Thank you for doing your homework. Next on the agenda is Willowwood Country Club, 551 Union Valley Road. Mike, I believe you had some comments?
Yep. I listed the variances that were granted by the zoning board of appeals. Noise study was done by Eric Thalheimer, I believe his name is. He provided for some solutions to get the property into compliance with the town of Carmel noise ordinance. Wire sound barriers only proposed on stations 4, 12, 13, and 14. Wouldn't sound barriers be helpful on every station? Would a berm with vegetation help muffle the noise for the immediately adjacent houses on Union Valley Road? This is what we discussed last time. If they put something with some growth on it, maybe that would help. And the engineer claims the sound barriers at the trap field are currently being reconstructed. In my last memo, I said they were down, so they're being constructed, and they are being replaced where they're supposed to be.
Thank you. Rich?
So applicant has provided a stormwater pollution prevention plan, which is currently under review. They provided a stormwater maintenance agreement, which needs to be reviewed by planning council. They need to provide a note that Schedule A for the agreement along with a bond must be provided, so that you need to note that a bond and Schedule A for the agreement must be provided as part of that stormwater maintenance agreement. They will provide engineering and performance bond fee moving forward. The applicant has provided rain garden calculations and has acknowledged there are wetlands and they're not encroaching on the wetlands, so.
Thank you, Rich. Pat?
So a few things, Mr. Chairman. At the last meeting, there was some question about the location of the sound barriers and whether or not they could be adjusted or moved. And they can relatively easily, but the applicant has indicated that they will not do that. As proposed on the plan, they will remain in that place. You can make that a condition of your approval. We do need to see the details of the sound barriers, the physical details, so we did not see that. So that needs to be shared with us, and I think there's some.
Could I just clarify something? It was, the sound barriers can't be moved. The cages, the shooting cages can be moved, but the sound barriers, they're big and heavy.
Okay, so at the last meeting, there was some confusion about
Okay.
that. So they are fixed, they will remain in place, and that's some mitigation measures. They must remain in place.
Right, okay.
Mike mentioned the noise consultant's report, a thorough report, but also a technical report. So it raised some issues and some concerns. It's written in layman's language, so I was able to understand it. However, it touches on issues that are technical in nature. So the primary question with that study, like any technical study that you review, is do you need your own expert to review that document? And that's your call, and whether or not you choose to do that. Much of the mitigation measures that they are proposing is based on the conclusions of that study. So in my own review of the study, there were some questions on assumptions that went into the consultant's conclusions. There was one comment in there that was caused some concern, which was the consultant's representation that the state noise ordinance supersedes our local noise ordinance. Joe has to take a look at that provision of the code, and it's also coming from their noise consultant, not their attorney, so this is an issue for Joe to really opine on. The issues of how the study was based. So example, there were baseline noise studies, there were baseline impact studies from when a round was fired, what the impact would be audibly and so forth. So that relates to when did you do them, where did you do them? There needs to be a little more like explanation. And the issue with respect to that really relates to when this course is being used as they have explained it would be used for competitions and so forth. Is it one station at a time or all of them simultaneously? Was that taken into consideration in the noise consultant's report? Is that the way it operates? So those kinds of things need to be incorporated into this consultant's analysis so we understand, were they taking into consideration the baseline conditions appropriately, and were they evaluating the way this course would be used, the way it's intended to be used when they were evaluating the impacts? So some clarifications, and again, whether or not we need an expert to help us review some of those things, again, it's up to you. We did receive some correspondence from neighbors that raised a couple of issues that we have not heard before. So there is one issue with respect to an easement that benefits the club, which is really a private issue between the neighbor and the club, but it raised some concerns about the implications of the operation of a gun club, spent ammunition and lead deposits and so forth. So in that letter, there was a question raised, was who regulates that? Does someone regulate that? So we have reached out to the DEC to find out if in fact this requires regulation or gets regulated. We haven't heard back from them yet. So maybe you have an answer to that, but we're reaching out to find out if there's another regulatory agency that governs the way this operation is used. There was two other issues with respect to that, one of which related to, and it was in the neighbor's memo, I can't confirm, but they were commenting on one of the shooting stations points toward the NYSEG high-tension lines, and the question was, is that a concern? Is that a problem? So we should hear from NYSEG to see if that's an issue, if they have regulations or requirements. Yeah, and the final issue related to DEC. Does DEC regulate this or not? And again, we're going to try to get an answer, but maybe you have an answer to that as well. So those are my comments, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Pat. George, maybe you'd like to address some of, if not all of Pat's comments now, prior to me turning it over to the board.
Right, the sporting clays course, well, you see the fields of fire, so it's a concentrated area, and that's all a dry area, so that's got nothing to do with DEC. DEC, as far as I know, has never attempted to regulate the lead going into those areas like that. There are some clubs that, after a period of years, do a reclamation program. It's a voluntary thing that the clubs do. For instance, Mid-Hudson Sporting Clays, which is over in New Paltz, I'm going to say 6 months ago, I could be off on the time frame, but I'll just say 6 months for purposes of argument, stripped off brought in a vendor. There are some vendors that specialize in lead reclamation. Basically, they strip off the top few inches of soil. They have there's different methods, but basically it involves shaking the soil. Some wash the water and reclaim the water, but it separates out the lead shot and the dirt. The dirt gets then re-spread out over the same area it was taken from. Up there, they went into these bags that can hold 3,000 pounds of lead. And I know, because that club had been open and is a very high volume, it's open to the public, I don't know, enormous amounts of lead were taken out of there. But it was strictly voluntary. DEC was not involved in any manner.
Yeah, so George, just
Nor was the town.
So you said they never have been. Are they supposed to be? So that's the
No.
question. You sure of that?
Yes.
Okay.
And DEC has been to this site actually as part of this process to validate the wetland boundary that does surround portions of the property.
Yeah, I do think that would be a different division, though, from the
Understood.
wetland folks, so.
The issue of the power lines, it's a non-issue.
George, can I just stay with the lead? So no lead's going into the wetlands?
No. There is, on the existing trap fields, there is a wetlands down there, and we do have a program that we monitor the pH of the wet soil out there, because we've learned over the years that so long as lead is in a neutral pH range, and I'm not the one that handles that, so I don't know off the top of my head the exact numbers for the neutral range, but as long as lead is kept in a neutral pH, it can stay there forever and is totally inert. And this club has been there, those trap fields and five stand have been there since 1955, and there's been no problems with the lead in those areas.
So George, just again, this was new to us. It resonates with me a little bit as a potential concern. So if it's not regulated by DEC, that's good. But if you do voluntary monitoring, would that be something you would commit to doing as a condition of approval? We'll continue our voluntary monitoring?
I don't see why.
If that's a best practice, like you've explained, many of the things you do are best practices,
I
we're
would-
gonna,
I
we'd
would
like
not
to
be
hear that.
opposed to continuing
So if you
that.
could just give us some details on how you do that, how it operates, and perhaps that's something we could include as a condition of approval.
I'm not the one that handles that, but I can get that to you.
Give us more information.
Sure.
I interrupted you with the power lines. Do you want to discuss that?
Yeah, there's no station that points directly to a power line. There is Station 6 up on the Sporting Clays course that is more or less underneath the power lines, but one of my jobs as chairman of the Sporting Clays is to make sure all target presentations are kept low to the ground, and in that station, Station 6, as part of the noise mitigation, we actually rotated that so the noise does not go across the valley, but rather is turned essentially 90 degrees and it's shooting down. So our backstop there is the ground, and so the shot is going down into the ground, and it's my job as part of the a sporting clays chairman, and before any target is set, or rephrase that, before any target is shot that's been reset by my committee of target setters, I go out and look at it for a whole host of reasons in terms of safety, orientation, if somebody swings and shoots early or shoots late, but in that particular case, make sure all shots are kept low as opposed to the high shot. So that's not a consideration. That's something that I'm cognizant of.
George, to your knowledge, NYSEG has no rules or regulations governing this in any way?
No.
Good.
We own the land that the power lines are on.
Yeah.
They have the easement, and we're not interfering with their easement whatsoever. The shots are, again, in that area are going to be because there's a rock. The Station 6 we're talking about
Yeah.
is up on an elevated rock, and the shots are down, so the shots will be going into the ground, either with rabbits rolling across the ground, or because there's an incline down, the shots will be coming downhill, holding that terrain, which makes for very interesting presentations, deceptive to the shooter, because it looks like it's going level, but it's really dropping fast.
Along that line, I remember when we came over to look at the site, the shooting stations, you had the physical barriers that prevented a shooter from turning too far.
The cages, right.
Is there anything blue sky to prevent them from going up?
Yes, there's a bar up at the top also that prevents them from going past a 90-degree.
So that would also be a preventative measure to make sure they couldn't shoot up towards the wires.
Well, it's not designed for that, but my job as the master target setter is going to be, all your shots have to stay low. So that physical limitation in the cage wouldn't necessarily stop that, but the target presentations are going to be so low beyond that, nobody's going to be shooting up there when the target's down there.
So George, if you're on vacation for a week and somebody else sets the targets,
I'm not the only guy.
Good.
I have backup.
just want to make sure.
Some of the shooters at our club are highly experienced. I myself just got back from the U.S. Open, and I think 6 of the people from our club were down there. We're talking about very experienced shooters. One of our club members is also a national delegate to the sport. Another's on the National Advisory Committee. We have some real depth at the club. It's not just me.
George, Pat mentioned that possibly Joe needs to look into if there's an exception for gun clubs. Are you aware of anything like that?
So what he's talking about is general business law that actually does preempt the local regulations for existing gun clubs. However, we're saying, despite that, which would set the limit at 90 decibels, we're trying to be good neighbors, and we're saying, we'll meet your 60 decibels, and we've done a pretty extensive noise report, and the expert, who's got incredible credentials, has come up with the various mitigation measures, which we've moved some of the stations, like Station 9 moved from facing basically towards Union Valley, being rotated and moved down to shoot in a direction away from there and into a hillside. He's designed, the barriers in the different locations. But, so we've put that out there, that the governing law is the state statute, but we are telling this board, we're willing to meet the, what we can in terms of the statute of the local ordinance, and we've come a long way to doing that, even though my interpretation is we don't have to. We could come in and say we could go with the 90, but we're not.
So George, you're okay with Pat putting that in a final resolution, that you'll meet the town's?
There's the one Station 6, because it's the same as the existing 5-stand. So that one, I think, was that at 64?
What he asked is, are you okay with a condition of resolution being that we will meet the town's noise ordinance?
Right, but there's one station, the existing trap field, I think was at 60, was it at 64?
We were below the standard.
We were? Okay. I don't remember off the top of my head if the existing trap field was a little below or a little below or a little above. I don't remember. But we've modified Station 6 so it's no louder than the existing 5-stand trap field. I take that back. We are below it. So yes, I have no problem with that then.
Okay, fair enough.
George, I also read through a lot of documentation. I believe the person's name that pat the lot, you talked about was Goldstein? Is that
Thalheimer, you mean, the expert?
the lot that, I'm sorry? The lot that, the easement that you have? Goldstein easement.
Oh, you're talking about the shotfall easement?
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
we have a, I'm sorry, I missed that.
That's his name, right? Goldstein is the person?
It's a recorded easement. I don't know who the current owner is of that property.
Well, can you tell us, can you explain to us the relationship you have, see, the property you have an easement with?
We have 15 acres that's in front of the trap fields. It's more or less of a triangular piece of property that starts towards the front of our property and goes back to the power lines where it gets much wider and goes basically all the way up to the top of the hill. And that easement allows us to put shot onto that property, because that's where the shot from the trap fields goes, onto that side of that hill that's in front of the trap fields. So we...
George, can you just
we
provide a
bought-
copy of that?
I'm sorry?
Can you provide a copy of that easement?
Sure.
Just so we can take a look at it? And while we're at it, can you also provide a copy of the NYSEG easement, just so I can take a look at that as well?
Sure.
Just to orient us, can you point to the Thalheim, or the easement we're talking about? Can you show us where that is on your map?
The shotfall easement?
Yeah, that's to the right of where you...
It would be somewhere
Right.
over here. It's not depicted on here, it would be to the east.
And that would be, as part of that, that would be included in your testing of the soil? You say that's where shots falling, right? On that.
We certainly can, yeah.
Do you have right to disturb that soil?
Yes, we have the right to go there and,
That's fine. Just want to make sure you had right to not just land the shot, but maintain it.
Joe has to look at the easement. In quick look at the easement, I think they have the obligation to remediate it if it's contaminated or damaged in one way or another. I think the club has assumed all that responsibility, so assuming they would be able to clean stuff up as well.
I haven't read that easement in a while, but I'll get it.
You've got some responsibilities, is what I said.
So I have one question. In the materials, we saw a bunch of, I'll call them best practices that I guess maybe you refer to as environmental practices to reduce environmental damage over time from shot. You mentioned that you do the pH testing. There was also, and you talked about another club doing some reclamation from the soil. And I guess the question, what is your club's plans in terms of reclamation, adopting some of these environmental practices or not?
Well, it doesn't make sense to dig up and strip off the layer of dirt until you're 10 years out. So we haven't discussed ripping up the sporting clays course, because until you've shot a lot of lead out there, it just doesn't make any sense. And in terms of the rest, you'd have, where we're putting the lead, there's a lot of trees. I don't know it would be feasible on the trap fields to do it, because where the lead is going onto that hillside, I don't think you could do it. Where they did it at Mid-Hudson, it was just a big open field. Much flatter, and there were no trees out there. They didn't go in, they do have some areas that are wooded. They didn't do it in the wooded areas. They did it in big, flat, open field.
we spent a lot of time, probably the item that we touched on the most was the acoustics, right? We're talking about again tonight. At the last meeting, we asked you to look into, I think we referenced like sound studios and acoustical, enhancements. Have you, I actually got online today and Googled, gun clubs, noise, acoustics. Have you considered making any improvements to your stations now to deafen in some of the noise?
Well, the stations 12, 13 and 14, 13 and 14 are going to have wings put on them and a roof put over them and soundproofing material put on the inside of them.
Good.
And
That's one of the suggestions they had that I was reading through today.
12, which is going to be an L, so cage shooting out this way is going to be an L, and that will be an L-shaped, and we'll have the acoustical stuff on the inside of that. The other stations, I don't see that it would really be effective because you're shooting into the mountainside, et cetera.
But George, that's the question why we
And
need the
four
details.
is going to have a barrier too. a
So
straight
for
wall barrier.
example, the acoustical material, is it weatherproof? Does it have to stay dry? Do you replace it every year? Like, those are the details we're asking for the details of those sound barriers.
We'll make sure it's included.
Yeah, we're gonna
We will include that. It's like a rubberized kind of thing. It's made to be outside in the elements, so it doesn't deteriorate. So, yes.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to go back to maybe the soils and the sampling. Maybe the applicant, it's up to the board if they want to request it, can ask for representative samples just to be collected to see if there's any lead contamination in the soil right now in some of the areas that are of concern. If there is, then maybe a remediation has to take place. It has to meet, there are state criteria. We require everybody who comes in, who brings in to fill, to have manifest. If they don't have manifest, or if they brought in fill, they have to meet certain criteria. If they were going to bring it non-restricted fill, maybe this doesn't have to meet a non-restricted fill type of thing, but maybe they do that, do a handful of samples. They don't have to do a lot, but they do that to understand, and maybe that'll alleviate some of the concerns if there's really no lead contamination in the soil at this time, and maybe it's something they do on an annual basis, or every 3 years, or every 5 years. I don't know quite what the schedule for that would be. It really would depend on use. But maybe some representative samples now of what's going on creates that baseline, and then they can sample going on. You're shooting toward a wetland. There's one in the other area which isn't part of this, but it's already part of the gun club. Lead will start leaching out at pHs of 6.5. Neutral is around 7. Wetlands are typically more acidic, which is on the lower end. So if they have that data which they've been collecting, that's great. That works in their favor, and they can provide it to us just to have and to review. But maybe they do some representative soil samples in some of the areas that we're concerned with. Again, that's the board's decision, and if the applicant's willing to do it or not willing to do it. So,
What's the board think?
I'd like to see it. Yeah.
I'd like to see some long-term vision about managing the lead in terms of at least observing when you're at a level that requires some action to be taken. I probably didn't say that clearly enough.
I didn't hear it. I'm
Okay.
sorry.
I'm more concerned about looking forward over time, that you are doing the type of testing and observations that will tell you when it's time to do some reclamation. Some commitment about how often, how long you will go, what period of testing will you go through, what is the type of testing, and what will you do with the results?
So that's the follow-up on Rich's question, if
Yeah.
I'm understanding right. Rich mentioned possibly getting a baseline,
Yeah.
right? So
But that's today. So when are they next going to test? And how often should they? That's
On that question, does the NRA have, because they have policies on everything. I wonder if the NRA has a policy already that you could adopt with regard to, lead and testing the soil and so on?
I'm not aware of any, and actually, the NRA would not be the one to consult on that. NRA is very well known in terms of Second Amendment rights, advocacy rights, but in terms of actual operations of gun clubs, the entity that has a lot more expertise on that is National Shooting Sports Foundation.
Well, maybe they have.
And I don't know. I could check, but I don't know.
I think that, yeah, I think we used to say something.
No, I was just waiting for George to finish. I think that the sense of the board is that they'd like to know that we don't have a problem right now. In order to help, help us help you, maybe do a report, some type of certified report, that the areas of all your shooting stations are acceptable as to whatever standard you want to reference, pH-wise and so forth, you want to stay at that, and then come back with the club's plan going forward, whether it's a 5-year or a 10-year reclamation if needed.
I'll look into it. I've never seen that type of forward-looking plan. I don't know what it would look like. I'll do some research. I'm pretty well knowledgeable of the shooting sports for sporting clays. I've never seen one, but that doesn't mean it's not out there.
Yeah, George, so I think it would benefit you. So if, in fact, there are no regulations from the DEC or the Health Department regarding this, and there are no industry standards related to how you would mitigate this, you're hearing the board raise some concerns. So absent you saying, no, here are best practices, they'll think it up for you. So you don't want them to do that.
I will do my best.
If there are industry standards, that would be very helpful to understand that. And again, we'll do our part to see if, in fact, there are regulatory controls that govern this. It seems surprising to me that there aren't. Just understand, I mean, there are regulations on how much fertilizer you can put in your lawn. So the amount of lead that's dumped into it, on a commercial facility like this that's not regulated seems just surprising to me. So we need to find out a little bit more about that. But in the meantime, George, I would be proactive in how you can help us understand that issue.
And we haven't even mentioned, maybe the DEP has some regulations, I don't know, when it comes to that. Again, it's water quality that might be being looked at when it comes to lead. This is in the watershed. Yes.
I'm sorry, I missed the last part.
This is in the watershed, so.
So that's
Well, none of the sporting clays courses in the watershed. The old the trap fields that have been there since 1955 shoot across the wetlands, but there's no part of the sporting clays course that's.
Watershed is different than a
The
wetland.
New York
Yeah.
City DEC.
DEP, no, you're in the watershed.
We're in the
We
New
are
York
sitting
City
in the watershed right now.
Yeah, there's nothing in the rules and regulations that I've ever read that address specifically this use or even lead in and of itself.
Is that-
But we
so
will
you-
certainly look, and
You've reviewed that?
I have read those regulations
Okay.
many times backwards and
Okay.
forwards.
Good.
But we'll, like I said, we'll double check. It's a fair question. We'll confirm that.
What's the board's thought on hiring our own noise consultant to have as part of our file? Any comments on?
To review the one done already, sir? or
Yeah, to
have a-
review the one that was done by Willowwood.
I think it would be good due
Not
diligence.
to review, I'm sorry, not to review the one that was done by Willowwood, to do one.
To do your own freestanding.
Independently
Right.
across.
Before we answer that, the report that was provided, was that stamped and sealed by an engineer?
Yes.
So with that being said, before we go into our,
So, just, George, the copies we have don't have the qualifications for Mr. Fellheimer. It's just an award. It's attached to the back of the report, so his stamp and seal is not on the copies we have. So we have that just in
Okay.
if he provides a stamp and seal on a copy, furnishes it to the board, I don't think we have to go back to square one. I think we then get a consultant to review this report, which has been certified, and attest to the fact that it was done
Well, it
correctly.
was done,
Or
like you
raised.
say correctly, done at certain times of day, not done at 7 AM every morning.
The whole
right?
process.
Right, yes, okay.
The whole process. And then, in turn, we would ask our consultant to come back with an executive summary that everybody on the board can understand. That would be my recommendation.
I would go for that.
I agree.
I agree with that.
I definitely agree with that, yeah.
And then this way, too,
Yeah.
we've done our due diligence.
I think we need it for our
town.
file,
Yeah.
for the town that says, look, certified engineer, noise consultant, we reviewed it. I'm just repeating what you said, I think we need
Yep.
it work.
And in conjunction with that, I just think we need Joe to opine on whether the town ordinance is still appropriate or whether, as the applicant proposes, which I'm not saying you're wrong, I just, have to have our attorney look at it, I think. just
Yeah,
to-
Ray, and I'd also say, even though George has agreed to comply with our local ordinance, the record now says our local ordinance does not apply.
Right.
I just don't know that that's correct or not, and I'd like to have Joe take a look at that and
I
verify
think Joe
that.
was going to look.
George, if you want to give me whatever you have in support of that premise, I'll take a look at that.
Sure.
Other than Mr., what's his name's report?
It was briefed in one of the sections of my memo of law in the Article 78, so I'll just send that over to you.
Okay, great, thank you.
So, Mr. Chairman, if you want to hire, do it by motion.
Well, I think we're gonna verify,
His
George is gonna
report.
get us some information first, right? Verify this,
The signing.
the engineer, and then we're gonna hire, I think I heard everyone on a.
Right, so
Yeah.
that's my, so if
We
you're
can
going to do
a
that,
vote
do it by
pending
motion
that-
right now.
The production of that stamp
Right, so,
sealed report.
so vote now to hire
Yeah.
your own consultant.
So I'll make a motion to have the board retain a sound engineer to review the report prepared by Mr. Eric Thalamer.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
The applicant will note that we'll have to have an escrow posted for that when the time comes that one is brought on board, so.
I think so much of the conversation during these meetings has revolved around the acoustics. I think that's gonna be really important. Any other comments?
So where did we leave off with the lead and reclamation?
Joe's gonna follow up with George on the lead. George's gonna get,
And we're following up on the regulatory side if in fact it's, they need somebody's review or approval.
Well, I think we're asking the applicant to do his research and bring forth some recommendation in terms of a go-forward approach.
Right. I'll look into that.
it was a lengthy
Get something.
discussion, but I think it boils down to a handful of items that we need clarification and support on to make our file complete.
Understood.
Any other comments from Joe, Mike, Rich, Paul? Anything from the board?
Nothing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next on our agenda is Suez Water, London Bridge Wells, 39 Brook Street. In the past, we discussed a lot of these Suez waters as one. I think tonight it'll benefit us to just stay with the one that's on the agenda at a time, right? So let's talk about Suez, 39 Brook Street, and let's not overlap with the other ones, so hopefully we can move things forward a little bit if you're ready. Mike, you had some comments on Suez, I believe. 39 Brook Street.
Linda Bridge, yep. Provide lot depth. I've been asking for this for 2 meetings now. I still haven't gotten it. They went to the zoning board, so hopefully they don't have to make another return trip. It's still not on the plat. And when you guys do the side yards, you write 50 feet total. We don't do that in this town. I don't know if that's a different town. We do 25 feet each for side yards. Just take it off, just so it doesn't get confusing. It's not a big deal, though. And that was it. The 2 variances were granted by the zoning board, and it's noted on the plan.
Thanks, Mike. Rich?
Applicant has noted all the referrals and permits that are required. They provided a stormwater pollution prevention plan, which is currently under review. It had to go through a big rehash, but it seems to be in a much better shape right now because they couldn't get the distance to groundwater. They provided a stormwater management agreement. I would recommend that it go to planning council for review. And they should note that Schedule A for the agreement along with a bond must be provided, so that's just something that's part of that maintenance agreement. And they need to, once this is moving forward and gonna go to a resolution, they need to provide a performance bond and associated engineering fee, and they've noted this requirement and will provide it when needed.
Thank you, Rich. And Pat, you had a few comments also.
A couple things. So when this was first presented, there's an existing driveway and they're building a new driveway. And the question was, do you need both driveways? They've indicated they will not use the second driveway and are willing to block it off. So if you want to make that a condition of approval, you can do that. There was also a question that went back and forth with respect to some larger trees on the property that were originally proposed to be preserved. Actually, originally proposed to be removed, and then they clarified that they can preserve them, and now they've indicated that that's the location of the stormwater management basin and have to be removed after all. So because there was so much attention given to those trees, they're coming out now, as I understand it.
Yes, so we tried to explain that in the comment letter. I'm sorry. Ramya Ramanathan from Adzel Nasher and Ziegler. We did take into account the board's request to preserve the 3 maple trees on the south of the driveway. But by the time we were updating the plans with all the comments we received, the tree clearing window kind of came up and they went ahead with the plan that was on file. But when we updated the drainage, like Pat mentioned, we've used that area for drainage mitigation. So we would have needed that space eventually, it turns out. But to compensate for that, we're providing 3 new maple trees as a part of our landscaping. So we wanted to bring that to the board's attention.
Thank you. Pat, other comments?
That's it. So the one comment that applies to all of these related to the clarification of the architectural materials. And if you remember at the last meeting, they shared the materials, the colors. So that applies to all of the applications, which I think we dealt with at the last meeting. So they have it apparently there again tonight to share with you. But I think you were satisfied at the last meeting with respect to that.
Can you take the microphone with you? I'm sorry. It's just because of the people on TV, not us.
I'm sorry. I keep one handy.
Are those cupcakes?
This is the concrete block sample for the foundation, just material samples for the board. We showed the color samples back in February, I believe, but this didn't make it back then, so we wanted to bring it and show it to the board. I think the board requested us to paint it to match the facade color. If the board is still open to that, we could do it. If not, this would be the natural color of the block.
Questions, comments from the board?
I guess I'm just looking for some clarification, because we discussed it, and I'm not sure that I ever got what I thought was a satisfactory answer. So this one is very, very close to the road, okay? Extremely visible, a huge building that's gonna go in there. And I asked about the trees, and you guys had talked about the trees that were gonna be put in at a certain size, and can you just run through that again?
Sure. So on the landscape plan, we note the different trees that we're proposing. We would gladly move this back and not have it so close to the road, but we're being restricted by wetlands and other site factors, which is why we're having to place it where it is right now. But to make up for whatever we can, we have provided all evergreen trees. Oh, finally. It's a bunch of green giants, hollies to screen the existing spring house, and cedars as well. So we've heavily landscaped anything that might show from Brook Avenue and also the front of the building. So we're trying to smush in as much trees as possible so that the visibility of the new buildings is diminished.
Okay, so here's my question. So I'm looking at the photograph you guys provided.
Yes.
All right, so what is the proposed height of the trees you'll be placing?
So we mentioned a range of the initial planting height to be 6 to 8 feet.
Okay, and
So-
a 20
And
plus building, right?
yes, give me just a second. I don't know where I kept my stuff.
Looks like 20-foot trees. There's two pictures.
Yes, it's a 22-feet building, you're right.
Okay, so it's
Yes.
1/3 the height of the building. So my question last time to you guys was, this is a unique site when we consider all the sites you guys have, in that this one, as I said, is right by the road. So people that live in that neighborhood are gonna be driving past it, people who live nearby. There's a person, I think, if you're standing in front, there's somebody to the right, and then if you're standing in front, there's somebody off to the left down a little bit. So I'm just thinking, we need to do a little bit more than 6-foot trees, I think personally, I don't know how the board feels, to try to mitigate the impact of this enormous building right on a road that people are gonna be driving by every day.
Okay, so we did consider this comment, and we discussed with the applicant on planting trees that are taller, but as the applicant stated, that planting taller trees doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to grow faster. Because they're more mature than younger trees, they're going to go at a slower rate. So the differential that you're seeing is really insignificant at that point. So yeah, smaller trees are younger and they have the tendency to spread sooner. So 6 to 8 feet seems to be the nominal range for these plantings to go in initially.
We
How
don't
much
mean
you-
to be resisting in this case. It's just that there is a bit of a trade-off about the size of the tree you plant. The bigger the tree, the longer it takes to get going. The small tree grows quickly. It's a bit of a trade-off, but we understand your point.
How quickly each year will, how much each year will the trees grow?
What's the rate of growth on those trees, do you know?
I'm not so sure, Steve, you know.
So there's two pictures here. One has 8-foot trees and one has 20-foot trees. So
That's basically showing what they will look
What
like
they'll look
once
like when
they
they
really
grow.
grow.
How long will it take to get there? That's the question.
It's not going to be months, it'll be years.
My understanding is the green giants can grow about 3 feet per year. That's why they get used at so many sites, because they grow fairly quickly.
So if you put in 8-foot trees, then you're looking at 11 a year later and 14 and so on?
Correct.
But in conversely, if you guys put in, say, at the outset, a 10-foot tree, you're saying that wouldn't grow at the 3 foot per year?
No, because what they do, the bigger the tree, the bigger the root ball, right? So when you transplant that bigger tree, you're not getting all of the roots. You're going to cut off a bunch of those roots. So when you plant that tree, it spends most of its energy growing new roots, and it doesn't grow up. Whereas a smaller tree, when they transplant it, you get a lot more of the roots. So when you plant it, it doesn't have to spend as much energy growing new roots. It can grow up. Like John said, it's a trade-off. We understand.
Any other comments? I think you worked with us pretty well here on this. I know we've had you through this several times. Do we have a motion to send this off for public comment?
I'd like to raise one point before that. We went to the ECB, we have the permits for the ECB, but we'd want to ask a town engineer because the drainage has changed since what we presented previously, and the ECB did advise us that we should go back to them if the plan changes. We didn't want to make that decision on our own. If the town engineer feels it's a significant change, we'd be happy to appear next week with the new plans. If he thinks this is good to go, then we'd take your blessing for the public hearing.
Rich, do you have an opinion so if I understand it, if the plans change significantly, you need to go back to this ECB, and you're asking us if the plans changed significantly, that they have personally, Mike?
I don't know if it's, I don't think it's that big of an issue, but no, that's part of my review of the SWIP, and I'll advise the ECB accordingly.
Okay.
So,
Thank you. So
Sure.
we should be fine. Thank you so much.
So then do we have a motion to schedule a public, Pat, did you have a comment?
No, you're scheduling a public hearing.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to schedule a public hearing for London Bridge, Suez Water.
Second by Kim. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Next, excuse me, Suez Water, Gaymore Wells, 70 Gaymore Drive. Mike?
Same thing, remove the total side yard of 50 feet. Comment that's on there, it's the same exact thing. The lot area variance was granted by the ZBA. I have no more comments on this one.
Rich, you had a couple comments?
so my comments,
Just 1 minute. I'm just waiting the board.
Oh, okay, that's okay. How come there's 4 of you there and you're doing all the work?
That's the way it goes. We're going to send her to law school, and then she's going to be big.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Yes.
Rich, comments, please?
so again, the applicant has noted referrals and permits that are needed. They have provided a stormwater pollution prevention plan, which is currently under review. As with the last application and this one, they've gone above and beyond what they should be doing for stormwater, so that's great for water quality. They have provided a FEMA floodplain map. There's some, I just need a little additional info for that. I'd like it to be submitted as its own standalone package versus it was a permit referring back to the planning board, so it should be its own standalone. That's just for a requirement of FEMA. They come and do audits every so often, and I gotta be able to say, here's the entire permit package, not go, here's the permit, and then we go get the planning board file. Again, stormwater maintenance agreement has been provided. Applicant, it should be reviewed by planning council and Schedule A, and the bond has to be provided, permitting and engineering fee, performance bond and engineering fee. The one thing the board needs to note also is a landscaping plan was originally shown or should be shown. They've requested a landscape waiver for this site, so that's up to the board to allow that. Otherwise, so the same comments as last time. That's the only thing different, is that they've requested a landscape waiver for this site.
And Pat?
So you'll remember, this is one of the trickier sites, and it's wet. It's in the floodplain. The applicant has basically come back to us and said, this is where it must be, because that's where the well is and the infrastructure is. And essentially, they're acknowledging that it'll flood, and they'll address it accordingly. And they're acknowledging the fact that they have that condition to deal with. So they mentioned using vehicles during the flood periods that are capable of moving through those flooded areas. The building may in fact, well, I think it's above the base flood elevation.
Yes.
It's likely that it's close, and there may be issues with respect to that. So they're acknowledging that. But the bottom line with respect to that story is they can't put it anywhere else. This is where it must be. So they're accepting that condition on the property. Rich's point, well taken. The landscaping plan, I think the applicant's arguing that the nearest neighbor is something like 150 feet away, so there really, in their opinion, isn't need to further supplement the landscape screening of the property. And again, that's your judgment.
And this is in the woods to begin with.
This is well in the woods. It's way
Yeah.
back in the
Yeah.
property.
Yeah.
So this, as opposed to the other one, you can't see this from the road.
Comments from the board? I'm personally okay with waiving the landscape plan. Ray and I are looking at it right here. It's deep in the woods for, comments? Anyone have any questions on this one?
I'm good.
Did you get Rich's comments on standalone for FEMA? Because,
Yes, we'll put that together for you.
okay.
Yeah, the information's all there. I just need it to be a separate document. It's part of the package, but I need to be able to pull it out as its own. That's all. Unfortunately, it becomes a paperwork exercise. I apologize for that.
That's fine.
Motion to schedule a public hearing?
Same thing for the ECB, just to be on the record, if you think we should go back to the ECB on this.
As the last app.
Okay.
I don't think that's necessary.
Understood.
At this time.
Pat, do we have to make a motion now to waive these?
You don't have to do it. It would be in your approval resolution would indicate you've waived that provision.
Yes, next.
So I'll make a motion to schedule this project for a public hearing, the Gaymore Wells 1 and 2.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Survey.
I thought I could have got you some help before, but. Next on the agenda, Suez Water, Chateau Wells, 59 McNair Drive. Mike?
Yeah, I think we discussed this last time, along the driveway to the right side, I think it's the east. Is there any way to put a buffer of some sort there? I know you have your driveway pretty much to the property line, but there's a house right on the other side.
Yes, so if you see the landscape plan, we've tried to
Yeah, but-
provide spire, one second, I need to see the tree name. Yeah. We've provided skyrockets all along, like we've tried to put the thinnest and the tallest trees possible in that very thin space between the property line and the driveway, and it's full of the skyrockets as far as possible. There's really no more space for us to work with there on the trees.
It was very tight. It was just a question for the board.
Yeah.
Again, the lot depth line is not provided on this one. It looks like it complies, but just show me where it is, make sure it complies. Remove total side yard of 50 feet from the table again, same thing. And there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 variances required, possibly 6 if the lot depth is not compliant.
Okay, sure. We would need a referral to the ZBA on this project. We didn't get that previously.
Mike, this was a property with the dumpster off to the side, right?
That
down
is
the cul-de-sac? Is that, does anyone know if that dumpster's been removed?
We're proposing a new dumpster, but that's not on the, it's over here.
Oh, okay.
On the bend now.
Not on the neighbors?
Yeah, not on the neighbors,
Great.
yes.
Okay. Thanks, Mike. Rich?
So pretty much general comments of referrals and permits, applicant has noted them. Stormwater pollution prevention plan has been provided, it's under review. Stormwater maintenance agreement's been provided, same comments as before, to be reviewed by planning council, and they need to provide a Schedule A and a bond, and they also need to provide the performance bond associated engineering fee for the project. Otherwise, my comments have been addressed.
Thank you, Rich. Pat?
And I have no further issues with this. I had an old comment relating to an easement, wrong site. My apologies, it's not this one. So no issues with this. They're good to be denied, sent off to the zoning board.
Any comments from anyone on the board?
None.
I just have a question. You said it was very narrow on that east side, so there's no room for plantings. Is that wide open view, though, from the
No,
neighborhood?
so with the little room that we have, we still have tried to provide skyrockets, which tend to be thinner and taller, but there's really no other species we could consider for that very thin stretch. But I can bring the plan closer to show you. It's actually landscape throughout.
Understood. Okay.
Yeah. One second. So if you see here, this entire stretch
Okay,
has
I can
skyrockets.
see the plan. Okay.
They're thin and tall, but that's basically the only thing we would do.
Okay.
with it.
Thank you.
Deny this to the ZBA?
And just while we're talking about landscaping, that landscaping is part of the site plan approval. It's there in perpetuity, so if they fail, you've got to replace them forever and ever and ever, unless they come back and amend the plans.
Okay, we'll deny this to the ZBA then.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to deny this application to the ZBA.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
I have the stamp here.
Where's the sample? I think you took it back, no? Oh, it's there at the end, yeah.
I'm sorry. That's not what you're sure when they build it.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Good night, everybody. Thank you. Nice job. Thank you.
Yes, we don't need a referral again to the CQP on this packet, so I'm going to make this official. Shadow. And coordinate this with the public hearing. 30 minutes. Should be next month. Yeah. A month from now. Should be those